The year changed on the calendar, but inside her, nothing felt new yet. Fireworks echoed somewhere far away, people celebrated fresh beginnings, and she sat quietly with the weight of everything she hadn't resolved. The past still pressed against her chest, and the future felt like a door she wasn't sure she was allowed to open. She didn't feel broken. Just tired of carrying memories, regrets, and expectations that no longer belonged to who she was becoming. The kind of tiredness that comes not from effort, but from holding on for too long. She had survived another year, but survival was no longer enough. What no one could see was how much she had already released internally. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just small moments of honesty, acceptance, and quiet surrender. And sometimes, that is exactly where miracles begin. The new year didn't ask her to become someone else. It asked her to let go of the version of herself shaped by old pain, old fear, and old timelines that never came true. That request felt terrifying and freeing at the same time. Before we go any further, if you believe that new beginnings don't come from forcing change but from releasing what no longer fits, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, "I am ready for the new." She entered the new year carrying more than memories. She carried unfinished conversations, choices she replayed in her mind, and versions of herself she no longer recognized. While others spoke about resolutions, she felt the quiet heaviness of things that never had closure. There were moments from the past that still visited her without warning. Not because she wanted them to, but because they had never been released properly. Old disappointments. Relationships that ended without answers. Dreams that slowly faded without explanation. She noticed how the future also weighed on her. Expectations about where she should be by now. Pressure to have clarity, direction, certainty. The future didn't feel open, it felt demanding, as if it were waiting for proof she wasn't sure she could provide. This invisible weight followed her into ordinary moments. Morning silence. Routine tasks. Late-night thoughts. Even when nothing went wrong, she felt tense, as if she were bracing for something that hadn't happened yet. She realized she had been living in between, not fully in the past, not fully in the present, and not trusting the future. Holding on to what hurt while worrying about what hadn't arrived. That in-between space drained her more than struggle ever did. There were days she tried to convince herself that time alone would fix everything. That the new year itself would magically reset her life. But deep down, she knew time doesn't heal what we refuse to release. What made it harder was how invisible this struggle was. From the outside, she looked composed. Responsible. Strong. Inside, she felt cluttered, emotionally full with no room for what wanted to arrive. She began to sense that something had to change, not externally, but internally. Not through effort, but through release. The miracle she needed wasn't about adding more. It was about letting go. And although she didn't yet know how to do that, a quiet realization settled in: the future couldn't open if her hands were still holding the past. That understanding lingered with her, gently but persistently, preparing her for the decision she was about to face. The realization didn't arrive with clarity or relief. It came slowly, through discomfort. She noticed how tightly she was holding on to things that no longer had a place in her life, memories that hurt, expectations that exhausted her, and versions of herself that no longer felt true. She saw how often she revisited the past, not to learn from it, but to punish herself with it. Replaying moments, wondering what she could have done differently, wishing for closure that never came. The past had become familiar, even when it was painful. At the same time, she felt the future pressing on her from the other side. Plans she hadn't made yet. Decisions she feared making wrong. The future felt heavy because she was trying to control it before trusting it. One quiet moment made everything clearer. She realized she had been asking the new year to give her something new, while refusing to release what was old. And that contradiction was blocking everything. Letting go suddenly felt less like loss and more like permission. Permission to stop explaining herself. Permission to stop carrying guilt that wasn't hers anymore. Permission to breathe without bracing for impact. She understood then that release is not forgetting. It's choosing peace over repetition. It's deciding that the past no longer gets to dictate the present. This wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was a grounded decision. A calm awareness that holding on was costing her more than letting go ever could. For the first time, she stopped asking when things would change and started asking what she needed to release to allow change to happen. That shift didn't solve everything instantly. But it opened something, space. And space is where miracles begin. Without realizing it, she had just stepped into the moment where the future could finally respond. She didn't sit down to perform a ritual or make dramatic promises to the universe. The release began quietly, in ordinary moments, when she noticed herself resisting less. Less fighting with her thoughts. Less arguing with what had already happened. Less trying to rewrite the past in her mind. One by one, she started acknowledging truths she had avoided. Some chapters were over. Some people were not coming back. Some dreams had expired, not because she failed, but because she had outgrown them. Accepting this felt heavy at first, but strangely honest. She allowed herself to feel sadness without turning it into a story of regret. She let disappointment exist without asking it to justify itself. For the first time, she wasn't trying to transform emotions into lessons immediately. She simply let them pass through. There was relief in no longer needing answers. Closure, she realized, doesn't always come from explanations. Sometimes it comes from permission to stop waiting, stop hoping, stop holding space for what no longer belongs. She noticed how her body responded to this shift. Her shoulders softened. Her breath slowed. The tension she had normalized for so long began to loosen, as if her nervous system finally felt safe enough to rest. This release didn't make her feel euphoric. It made her feel lighter. Less crowded inside. As if something invisible had been gently set down after being carried for far too long. She understood that letting go wasn't an act of weakness. It was an act of self-respect. A decision to no longer carry what the past had already finished saying. In that space, something new emerged, not excitement, but clarity. The clarity that comes when resistance dissolves and truth no longer needs defending. She didn't know what the future would bring. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of not knowing. And that quiet openness changed everything. Without forcing it, without demanding proof, she had made room. And the universe responds quickly to room. She didn't sit down to perform a ritual or make dramatic promises to the universe. The release began quietly, in ordinary moments, when she noticed herself resisting less. Less fighting with her thoughts. Less arguing with what had already happened. Less trying to rewrite the past in her mind. One by one, she started acknowledging truths she had avoided. Some chapters were over. Some people were not coming back. Some dreams had expired, not because she failed, but because she had outgrown them. Accepting this felt heavy at first, but strangely honest. She allowed herself to feel sadness without turning it into a story of regret. She let disappointment exist without asking it to justify itself. For the first time, she wasn't trying to transform emotions into lessons immediately. She simply let them pass through. There was relief in no longer needing answers. Closure, she realized, doesn't always come from explanations. Sometimes it comes from permission to stop waiting, stop hoping, stop holding space for what no longer belongs. She noticed how her body responded to this shift. Her shoulders softened. Her breath slowed. The tension she had normalized for so long began to loosen, as if her nervous system finally felt safe enough to rest. This release didn't make her feel euphoric. It made her feel lighter. Less crowded inside. As if something invisible had been gently set down after being carried for far too long. She understood that letting go wasn't an act of weakness. It was an act of self-respect. A decision to no longer carry what the past had already finished saying. In that space, something new emerged, not excitement, but clarity. The clarity that comes when resistance dissolves and truth no longer needs defending. She didn't know what the future would bring. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of not knowing. And that quiet openness changed everything. Without forcing it, without demanding proof, she had made room. And the universe responds quickly to room. Something subtle shifted once she stopped filling the silence with worry. The future, which once felt heavy and demanding, began to feel distant, not in a cold way, but in a gentle one. It no longer stood in front of her like a test she needed to pass. She noticed how often she had been living ahead of herself. Anticipating problems that hadn't happened. Preparing for disappointments that never arrived. The future had felt threatening because she was trying to control it instead of trusting it. Without the past pulling her backward and the future pulling her forward, she finally landed in the present. And the present, she discovered, was calmer than she expected. It didn't require answers. It only asked for attention. This shift didn't mean she stopped caring about what was next. It meant she stopped fearing it. The difference was profound. Care comes from alignment. Fear comes from resistance. She was learning to tell them apart. She realized that most of her anxiety had never been about real events, it was about imagined outcomes. Letting go had interrupted that cycle. The mind, no longer fed with fear, began to soften. In this calmer state, intuition became clearer. She started noticing inner nudges instead of loud worries. Small impulses. Gentle ideas. The kind that only surface when the nervous system feels safe. The future didn't open all at once. It simply stopped closing itself. And that alone changed how she moved through her days. She felt less pressure to rush. Less urgency to prove herself. Less need to justify her pace. For the first time, she trusted that timing didn't have to be forced. This wasn't passivity. It was grounded confidence. The kind that comes from knowing you're no longer running from anything, or toward anything out of fear. Without realizing it, she had crossed another threshold. The future no longer felt like something she had to survive. It felt like something she could finally meet. Once the future stopped feeling like a threat, small shifts began to appear around her. Not dramatic events, just subtle signs that felt oddly precise. A conversation that arrived at the right moment. A message that answered a question she hadn't spoken out loud. She noticed timing working differently. Things no longer felt delayed or rushed. Situations unfolded with a sense of order she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't that life became easy, it became coherent. At first, she hesitated to assign meaning to these moments. She had learned not to romanticize coincidences. But there were too many of them, and they carried a familiar feeling, recognition. Her intuition grew quieter but clearer. Instead of overthinking every choice, she began to trust the first calm response inside her. That internal signal felt steady, not emotional. And it rarely led her wrong. She saw how releasing the past had freed mental space. Space that allowed her to notice what had always been there. Opportunities hadn't suddenly appeared, she had simply become available to see them. Some signs came through people. Others through ideas. Some through unexpected calm in situations that once triggered fear. Each one reinforced the same message, alignment was active. She didn't rush to interpret these moments as guarantees. She simply acknowledged them with gratitude. Recognition, she realized, strengthens awareness without turning it into attachment. The more she stayed present, the more natural these moments felt. Like reminders instead of rewards. Like guidance rather than proof. She understood then that signs don't shout. They confirm. And confirmation only arrives when resistance has softened enough to receive it. Without trying to manifest anything specific, she had entered a phase where life responded gently. And that gentleness felt like the first true miracle of the new year. She didn't rush to create new goals or resolutions. Instead, she focused on staying open. Open to guidance. Open to clarity. Open to the version of herself that was emerging without pressure. This became her quiet practice for the new year. Each morning, she sat with a notebook, not to force outcomes, but to listen. She titled it Journal Manifestation, not as a promise of results, but as a reminder of intention. The act of writing grounded her in the present. She wrote honestly. Some days the pages were calm. Other days uncertain. She didn't censor herself. She didn't try to sound positive. She simply allowed truth to move through her hand and onto the page. Instead of scripting the future, she described how she wanted to feel. Safe. Clear. Supported. Free. Those emotions became her compass, guiding decisions without pressure. Gratitude appeared naturally in her writing. Not gratitude for things she didn't yet have, but for space, clarity, and calm. She learned that gratitude for being often opens more than gratitude for having. This practice wasn't about control. It was about alignment. The more she wrote without expectation, the more she trusted the process unfolding around her. She noticed how this simple ritual anchored her days. Even when uncertainty returned, she had a place to return to, a page that didn't judge or demand certainty. Over time, the notebook stopped feeling like a tool and started feeling like a conversation. A dialogue between her inner truth and the future that was slowly opening. She didn't need to check for signs anymore. The practice itself became confirmation that she was moving in the right direction. And by choosing presence over pressure, she unknowingly strengthened the foundation for everything that was about to arrive next. Something changed quietly inside her as the days passed. The past didn't disappear, but it stopped speaking as loudly. Memories that once demanded attention began to feel distant, like echoes instead of commands. She noticed that she could remember without reliving, and that alone felt like freedom. She realized how much energy she had spent negotiating with old stories, explaining them, justifying them, trying to make them mean something different. Letting go didn't erase what happened, but it removed the emotional charge attached to it. The past no longer defined her direction. There were moments when old thoughts tried to return, especially during quiet nights. But instead of pulling her back, they passed through more quickly. She didn't argue with them. She didn't analyze them. She simply let them move on, trusting that they had nothing new to teach her. What surprised her most was how her body responded. Without the constant replay of old emotions, she felt lighter physically. Her breath deepened. Her jaw unclenched. It was as if her nervous system finally understood that the danger was over. She noticed how differently she spoke about herself now. Less judgment. Less explanation. Less need to defend who she was or who she had been. Silence replaced self-criticism, and that silence felt respectful rather than empty. The past lost its authority the moment she stopped asking it for permission to move forward. She no longer needed closure from people, events, or versions of herself that couldn't meet her where she was now. Peace became self-generated. She understood that healing wasn't about revisiting every wound. It was about deciding which memories deserved continued attention and which ones could rest. Not everything needs to be carried forward. This shift didn't make her forgetful, it made her discerning. She chose presence over rumination, awareness over attachment. Each choice strengthened her sense of inner stability. The future, once blocked by unresolved emotions, began to feel closer. Not urgent. Just accessible. And accessibility, she realized, is what allows new paths to form. Without ceremony or announcement, the past stepped back. And in that quiet retreat, the space for something new expanded even further. As the past grew quieter, she began to notice something else taking shape inside her, a subtle but undeniable shift in identity. She was no longer reacting to life from old emotional reflexes. Instead, she responded from a calmer, more grounded place, as if her inner world had reorganized itself without force. She realized that letting go wasn't only about memories or emotions. It was also about releasing the identity she had built around struggle. For so long, she had defined herself by endurance, by strength in silence, by how much she could carry without falling apart. That version of her had served a purpose, but it was no longer required. This awareness was uncomfortable at first. When struggle fades, it leaves behind an unfamiliar question: who am I when I'm not surviving? She didn't rush to answer it. She allowed the question to exist, trusting that clarity would come through living, not overthinking. Her decisions began to change in subtle ways. She stopped choosing based on fear of loss and started choosing based on alignment with how she wanted to feel. Peace became a filter. If something disrupted it unnecessarily, she reconsidered. This alone altered the trajectory of her days. She noticed that her energy shifted before her circumstances did. People responded to her differently. Conversations flowed with less resistance. Situations that once felt heavy resolved more smoothly. The universe often responds first to internal consistency, long before visible results appear. There was a new steadiness in how she moved through uncertainty. Not confidence built on guarantees, but confidence rooted in self-trust. She didn't need to know the outcome to feel safe moving forward. That was new, and powerful. The future no longer felt like something she had to earn through suffering. It felt like something she was allowed to receive simply by being aligned with who she was becoming. This realization softened her expectations without lowering them. She understood that identity isn't declared once, it's practiced daily. In thoughts she entertained. In boundaries she honored. In the way she spoke to herself when no one else was listening. These quiet practices shaped her more than any external milestone. With each day lived from this new internal posture, resistance dissolved further. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became cooperative. And cooperation creates momentum. By releasing who she had been required to be, she unknowingly made room for who the future had been waiting for all along. Once her inner posture changed, life began to respond in ways that felt almost effortless. Not instantly, and not dramatically, but with a kind of quiet cooperation she hadn't experienced before. Situations that once required pushing, explaining, or insisting now unfolded with less resistance, as if the current had softened. She noticed that she no longer felt the urge to chase outcomes. The urgency that once lived in her chest had dissolved into patience. Not passive patience, but grounded trust. She still took action, but her actions came from clarity, not fear. Opportunities started to appear in subtle forms. A conversation that opened a new possibility. An idea that arrived fully formed, without struggle. An invitation that aligned perfectly with her new pace. None of it felt random. It felt responsive. What stood out most was how natural it all felt. There was no shock, no disbelief. Just recognition. As if these experiences were overdue, waiting for her to be ready to receive them without tension. She realized that the universe hadn't changed its behavior, she had. By releasing resistance, she had changed the way she met life. And life, in turn, mirrored that openness with ease. There were still moments of uncertainty, but they no longer derailed her. Instead of spiraling, she paused. Instead of forcing clarity, she allowed it to arrive. This shift protected her energy and preserved momentum. She began to trust timing again. Not the rigid timelines she once imposed on herself, but organic timing, the kind that unfolds naturally when alignment is present. Delays no longer felt like rejection. They felt like refinement. Her journal manifestation evolved alongside her. She wrote less about what she wanted and more about what she was noticing. Evidence replaced requests. Awareness replaced urgency. The pages reflected a woman no longer waiting for permission. The more she honored this rhythm, the more life seemed to meet her halfway. Effort and flow found balance. Action and surrender coexisted without conflict. She understood then that manifestation doesn't require force, it requires readiness. And readiness is felt, not announced. It's the calm knowing that you no longer need to prove anything to receive. Without striving, without struggle, the future continued to open, responding not to her wishes, but to her alignment. At some point, she realized she had gone an entire day without revisiting the past. No replaying conversations. No questioning old decisions. No emotional bargaining with memories that once demanded constant attention. The absence surprised her more than the pain ever had. She noticed how natural this felt, not forced, not intentional, just real. The past hadn't been pushed away, it had gently lost relevance. Like a story she once lived but no longer needed to reread to understand who she was. What changed was not memory, but attachment. She could remember without tightening. Reflect without spiraling. The emotional hooks that once pulled her backwards simply didn't catch anymore. And that freedom felt steady, not dramatic. She understood then that healing doesn't always arrive as closure. Sometimes it arrives as neutrality. The moment when something that once controlled you no longer holds emotional authority over your present. There was no announcement, no symbolic goodbye. Just a quiet recognition that the energy she had once spent looking back was now available for living forward. And that shift felt like reclaiming time. She became more present in ordinary moments. Conversations felt fuller. Decisions felt lighter. She wasn't splitting her attention between what was and what had been. Presence became complete. This new relationship with time changed how she experienced herself. She no longer measured her worth against past versions or missed timelines. She met herself where she was, without comparison, without apology. She realized how much strength it had taken to survive while holding on. And how much wisdom it took to release without resentment. Letting go, she learned, is an act of emotional intelligence. The future didn't rush in immediately. But it felt closer. Accessible. Like a horizon no longer blocked by unresolved weight. And that accessibility created calm confidence. By no longer looking back, she didn't erase her story. She honored it, by allowing herself to live beyond it. What emerged after she stopped looking back was not excitement, but confidence, the quiet kind. Not the confidence that announces itself, but the kind that settles into the body and changes how you move through the world. She felt steadier, less reactive, more present in her own skin. She noticed how her inner dialogue softened. The constant need to explain herself, to herself, faded. She didn't rehearse conversations in advance anymore. She didn't brace for disappointment before it arrived. She trusted herself to respond when needed, instead of preparing for everything. This confidence wasn't built on achievements or outcomes. It wasn't dependent on what was happening externally. It came from knowing she could be with whatever arose without losing herself. That awareness created a sense of safety she had never felt before. Her posture changed subtly. Shoulders relaxed. Movements slowed. She occupied space without apology. People sensed it, not because she demanded attention, but because she no longer avoided it. She realized how much energy she had once spent anticipating judgment or rejection. With that gone, she felt lighter. More available for genuine connection. More willing to speak from truth instead of fear. This confidence didn't rush her forward. It grounded her where she was. She stopped measuring progress against imagined timelines. Instead, she honored her pace, trusting that alignment unfolds in its own rhythm. She found herself making decisions with ease. Not because choices were obvious, but because she trusted her discernment. Even uncertainty felt manageable now, it no longer threatened her sense of self. The future, once distant and intimidating, felt familiar. Not predictable, but welcoming. She sensed that whatever came next would meet her at the level she was meeting herself. This quiet confidence became her new foundation. Not flashy. Not performative. Just real. And reality, she learned, is what the universe responds to most clearly. Without forcing belief, without affirmations shouted into the void, she had become someone who trusted her own alignment, and that trust changed everything. There was a moment when she realized she had stopped waiting. Not waiting for permission, not waiting for certainty, not waiting for life to finally feel complete. The present moment, once something she endured on the way to something better, had quietly become enough. She noticed how different this felt from resignation. This wasn't settling. This was contentment without complacency. A grounded acceptance that allowed her to enjoy where she was while remaining open to what could come next. The urgency that once colored every thought had softened into presence. She didn't rush through days anymore. She lived inside them. Morning light felt richer. Silence felt supportive instead of empty. Time slowed, not because life stalled, but because she was finally there for it. She understood then that peace is not the absence of desire. It's the absence of resistance. She still had hopes. Still held visions. But they no longer pulled her out of the present or made her feel incomplete. This relationship with now changed everything. She stopped postponing joy until conditions improved. She allowed satisfaction without guilt, even while knowing growth was still unfolding. The universe responds clearly to this state. Not because contentment cancels desire, but because it signals trust. Trust that life doesn't need to be forced. Trust that what's meant to arrive will do so in alignment. She found herself smiling without reason. Not from excitement, but from ease. A deep sense of okayness settled into her days, making even ordinary moments feel significant. This was not the miracle she had imagined at the beginning of the year. It was quieter. More stable. And far more transformative. Because it changed how she experienced everything else. She realized that when the present becomes enough, the future stops being a demand and starts becoming a gift. Something to welcome, not chase. And in this state of grounded presence, she unknowingly crossed into the final phase of her transformation, where alignment becomes visible. When the future finally began to open, it didn't announce itself with dramatic changes or sudden breakthroughs. It arrived quietly, through moments that felt natural, almost ordinary, yet unmistakably aligned. Doors didn't crash open. They unlocked gently, as if they had been waiting for her to stop pushing. She noticed that opportunities now felt inviting instead of intimidating. The same situations that once triggered doubt or fear now met her with calm curiosity. She didn't question whether she deserved them. She simply met them as herself, grounded and present. What surprised her most was how little effort this phase required. Not because she stopped acting, but because her actions no longer came from urgency. She moved with clarity, not pressure. With trust, not expectation. And that changed the quality of every step she took. The future no longer demanded that she prove herself. It responded to who she already was. This was the shift she had been waiting for without realizing it, when alignment replaced anticipation, and readiness replaced anxiety. She understood then that letting go of the past had also released her from rehearsing the future. She wasn't scripting outcomes anymore. She was participating in life as it unfolded, confident that she could respond to whatever came next. There were moments when she paused and recognized how different everything felt. Not externally at first, but internally. The absence of fear made space for intuition. The absence of control made space for flow. And flow carried her forward effortlessly. She no longer asked the new year to change her life. She had already changed how she met it. And the year, in return, began to reflect that shift back to her with precision. This was the miracle she hadn't known how to ask for. Not a single event, but a sustained state. A future that opened because she stopped resisting the present. The unfolding ahead didn't feel overwhelming. It felt welcoming. Like a path that adjusts to your pace instead of demanding speed. And as she stepped into this open future, she realized something profound: the miracle wasn't waiting somewhere ahead. It had already happened the moment she let go. There was a time when she needed signs to feel safe. Confirmation to trust. Evidence to keep going. But somewhere along the way, that need quietly dissolved. She realized she no longer required proof to believe in her own alignment. Belief had become embodied, not conditional. She noticed how different this felt from blind faith. This wasn't denial or wishful thinking. It was grounded awareness, the knowing that comes from lived experience rather than promises. She had seen how life responded when she stopped resisting. That was enough. Moments that once would have sent her searching for meaning now passed without analysis. She didn't dissect every outcome. She didn't assign spiritual weight to every coincidence. She allowed life to be life, trusting that alignment didn't need constant validation. This shift freed enormous mental energy. Without the pressure to interpret or justify, she stayed present. Calm replaced vigilance. And calm became her most reliable guide. She realized that needing proof had once kept her stuck. Waiting for certainty before moving. Waiting for guarantees before trusting herself. Letting go of that need allowed her to move with quiet authority. When challenges appeared, she didn't question alignment. She responded with curiosity instead of fear. Not everything was perfect, but nothing felt threatening to her sense of self anymore. Her journal manifestation reflected this evolution. The pages were no longer filled with requests or affirmations written for reassurance. They became observations. Gratitude. Integration. A record of awareness rather than desire. She understood then that the universe doesn't reward doubt with proof. It responds to coherence. And coherence had become her natural state. The absence of proof-seeking wasn't indifference. It was trust matured into presence. The kind of trust that doesn't ask, "Is this working?" Because it no longer needs to. And in releasing the need for confirmation, she stepped fully into alignment, where life flows without negotiation. She began to recognize herself in ways she never had before. Not through achievements or external validation, but through how lightly she now moved through situations that once would have consumed her. She noticed she no longer clung to outcomes, people, or expectations. There was space between experience and reaction, and in that space, she felt free. Situations that once triggered urgency now passed without gripping her nervous system. She could care deeply without attaching. She could desire without demanding. This balance didn't make her distant, it made her present without pressure. And presence changed everything. She realized how much clinging had shaped her past. Holding on to what hurt. Holding on to what might happen. Holding on to versions of herself she thought she needed to survive. Releasing those patterns didn't erase her history, it softened her relationship with it. This version of her trusted flow without becoming passive. She still chose. Still acted. Still honored her values. But she no longer tried to control how life responded. She allowed life to meet her where she stood, instead of dragging it toward imagined outcomes. There was relief in not needing to secure the future emotionally. She stopped building safety through anticipation. Safety now came from self-trust, the knowing that she could navigate whatever unfolded without losing herself. She noticed how relationships shifted in response to this change. Without clinging, connections felt cleaner. More honest. Less charged. She didn't need to hold people tightly to feel secure, and that allowed genuine closeness to form. Even uncertainty lost its sharpness. Not knowing became acceptable. Neutral. Sometimes even inviting. She learned that clarity often arrives after release, not before it. Her journal manifestation reflected this evolution. The writing felt spacious, unforced, almost conversational. Less about shaping reality and more about acknowledging alignment as it unfolded naturally. This version of her wasn't trying to prove anything, not to the universe, not to others, not to herself. And in that absence of effort, her life felt more authentic than it ever had. By no longer clinging, she didn't lose direction. She gained it. And that direction felt steady, grounded, and quietly powerful. Looking back, she could see how the year itself had begun to respond differently to her. Not because she demanded change, but because she no longer resisted it. The rhythm of life adjusted to match her inner pace, and what once felt chaotic now felt synchronized. She noticed how situations resolved themselves with less effort. Problems didn't disappear, but they no longer multiplied. Conversations reached clarity faster. Decisions carried less emotional weight. It was as if the year met her halfway once she stopped pulling against it. What surprised her most was how natural this felt. There was no sense of finally winning. Just a quiet recognition that alignment had become her default state. Life felt less like something happening to her and more like something unfolding with her. She realized that release had created momentum. Not the rushed kind, but steady movement forward. Each step felt supported, even when outcomes weren't fully visible yet. Trust filled the gaps where fear once lived. Her journal manifestation became a place of reflection rather than intention. She documented patterns, moments of ease, and small confirmations of flow. Writing no longer felt like an act of creation, it felt like witnessing. There were still unknowns ahead, but they no longer felt heavy. Uncertainty had softened into curiosity. The future wasn't something she needed to solve. It was something she was allowed to discover. She understood then that miracles don't always look like sudden breakthroughs. Sometimes they look like a year that stops fighting you. A life that cooperates. A nervous system that feels safe enough to trust what's next. This realization grounded her deeply. She wasn't chasing alignment anymore. She was living it. And living it changed the texture of every experience. The year continued to unfold, not perfectly, but honestly. And honesty, she learned, is one of the most powerful frequencies there is. By releasing what no longer belonged to her, she had allowed the year to meet her fully, and that meeting changed everything. It took time for her to recognize what the miracle truly was. It wasn't a single event she could point to or a dramatic change she could explain to others. The miracle revealed itself slowly, through awareness, the kind that arrives when you stop searching for proof and start noticing what has already shifted. She realized that her life no longer felt heavy. Not perfect, not effortless, but lighter. Problems didn't define her days anymore. They existed, but they didn't occupy her entire inner world. Space had returned to her life, and with it, choice. What moved her most was how safe she felt within herself. Safety had once depended on outcomes, stability, or reassurance from the outside. Now it lived inside her, steady and quiet. That inner safety changed how she met every experience. She noticed how she trusted herself implicitly. Not because she knew what would happen, but because she trusted her ability to respond. That trust dissolved fear more effectively than certainty ever could. The miracle wasn't that the future opened, it was that she was no longer afraid to step into it. The courage she once prayed for had arrived in the form of calm readiness. She saw how every phase had prepared her for this awareness. The release. The silence. The uncertainty. None of it was wasted. Each moment shaped her capacity to receive without tension. Her journal manifestation now read like a timeline of transformation. Not a list of wishes fulfilled, but a record of who she had become. The miracle wasn't written in the pages, it was reflected through them. She understood then that miracles often disguise themselves as shifts in perception. When perception changes, reality follows. Always. Without exception. This recognition filled her with gratitude, not excitement. Gratitude that grounded her deeply in the present, allowing her to honor the journey without clinging to it. And in that grounded gratitude, she knew she was ready for the final chapter, not because everything was resolved, but because she finally was. She entered the new year believing she needed answers, direction, and certainty. What she discovered instead was something far more powerful: release. By letting go of the past and loosening her grip on the future, she didn't lose control. She gained access. Access to presence. Access to clarity. Access to herself. The miracle didn't arrive because she demanded change. It arrived because she stopped resisting it. The universe didn't need to be convinced, it only needed space. And the moment she created that space, life responded in ways that felt natural, steady, and deeply aligned. This story isn't about her being special. It's about timing, honesty, and readiness. About what happens when someone chooses peace over repetition, trust over fear, and alignment over force. That choice quietly changes everything. If this journey felt familiar, it's because transformation often looks ordinary from the outside. It happens in silence. In pauses. In decisions no one applauds. And yet, those are the moments that open futures. If this story touched you, take a moment to acknowledge it. Like the video. Subscribe to stay close to stories like this. Share it with someone who may be standing at the edge of release without knowing it yet. And if you feel ready, leave a comment with the word alignment, not as a promise, but as a recognition of where you are right now. The new year didn't bring her a miracle. She became available for one. And when that happens, the future doesn't need to be chased. It opens.